That November rain felt like ice against my skin. I was 14, waiting at the rear exit of the Riverside home at exactly 12:15 in the morning. My palm rested against the freezing steel push bar. Deep down, I understood the stakes. If I shoved that door open, there was no U-turn. I am Ren Callaway, and this is how I stumbled into a real family where I least looked for one. Before that, you need to know why I was standing in a corridor reeking of bleach and disappointment, holding only a rucksack and $73. At 11, my mother picked her boyfriend instead of me. That isn't teenage drama talking, it is a simple fact. Rick was the guy. He owned a leather jacket, a truck, and absolutely zero desire to father someone else's child. He actually said that. I heard it through the drywall when I was pretending to be asleep. "Choose," he told her or me. I'm not babysitting another guy's brat. I held my breath, waiting for Mom to fight back, to kick him out, to pick the girl she'd raised for 11 years. The quiet dragged on for an eternity. Finally, she whispered, "I'll handle it." 3 days after that, a social worker knocked on our door holding a thick file and wearing a plastic smile. Mom gave me a squeeze, swore she'd fix everything, and stood there while I got into a sedan with my life in a trash bag. I never saw her face again. She didn't fix a thing. No letters, no phone calls. I learned eventually that she and Rick skipped town for Arizona 2 months later. Left no trail, gave no reasons. Just vanished. I became property of the state of Nebraska. Case number 201. 94471. Just a data point. A file jammed into a drawer. I bounced through 4 homes in the next 3 years. The first stop lasted 6 months. The Hendersons were decent, but their house was full with 3 biological kids. Once Mrs. Henderson announced baby number 4, they told the agency, with apologies, that I had to go. Next up was a facility in Lincoln, 40 kids, total mayhem. I got smart fast, sleep on top of your bag, and never let good stuff out of your sight. I survived 8 months before the transfer. Then came the Dawsons. Mr. Dawson was an alcoholic. His wife ignored it. I didn't. When I flagged it, they called me a liar. So I got packed off again. Turns out the whistleblower is the issue, not the grown-ups acting badly. That road led to Riverside. It was a massive brick pile on the outskirts of Breerwood, Nebraska. 32 minors, age 6 to 17, with just 4 counselors juggling everyone's nightmares and necessities. We got meals, we got outfits, we went to class. But the nurturing stopped there. The workers weren't mean, just buried, suffocated by red tape and a sea of kids needing more love than the staff had in the tank. We were occupancy rates and calorie counts. I learned to stay invisible. No noise, no requests. Expect 0 and you won't get hurt. But 3 years in, my resolve started cracking. I looked at the ones turning 18, facing eviction from the system. I saw my own ghost in their empty stares. 0 safety net, nobody waiting for them on the outside. Kicked to the curb with a sack of clothes and a couple of $100, supposed to be adults without a manual. I refused to be that casualty. So I plotted. I spent 3 weeks getting ready. I hoarded cafeteria scraps, granola bars, crackers, anything shelf-stable that wouldn't trigger an inventory check. Stashed them in my bag, wrapped in laundry to fool the room inspections. I scraped together every cent from odd jobs, scrubbing floors, raking leaves, kitchen prep. They tossed us pocket change, $1 here, $2 there. Not a fortune, but by the middle of November, I had $73 hidden in a sock. I memorized the guard patterns. Mr. Patterson, the night watchman, walked the floor at 10:30 and was usually snoring in the office by 12. He was in his 60s, exhausted, and watching the clock for his pension. Not a bad guy, just checked out. The East Wing fire door had a glitchy sensor. The repair crew had it on a list for months, but other things always took priority. I'd run dry runs off the alarm system twice. Slipped out during drills just to ensure silence really meant silence. It held. So I picked my moment. A random Tuesday, deep in November. The weatherman promised a deluge. Perfect. Torrential downpours keep the streets empty and the prying eyes blind. It meant I'd be freezing and soaked to the bone, but that was the price of admission. That night, I didn't bother with pajamas. I stayed dressed under the covers. I layered up. Double t-shirts, the thickest sweatshirt I had, and the denim that still had both knees intact. My life fit into a single rucksack. It wasn't a heavy load. Just the basics. Spare layers, rations, hydration, a torch, a little cash, and and desperation in the memory I refused to lose. It was a snapshot from 6 years ago. Just Mom and me back when I was 8 at some county carnival. We're grinning like idiots in the shot, Ferris wheel looming behind us. She's got me in a squeeze and I'm clutching a cloud of pink sugar that dwarfed my own head. We looked complete, joyful. I don't know why I tortured myself by keeping it. Every glance was a fresh cut. It was a dull, constant throb in my chest. Yet, abandoning it was impossible. That distinct rectangle of paper was the only evidence that I once mattered to somebody, even if that affection couldn't save me from ending up here. Midnight passed. 5 minutes later, Mr. Patterson's rhythm began. His saw blade snores rattled down the corridor. I gave it another 10 minutes of buffer time. Safety first. I eased up from the mattress. My chest felt like a drum circle, so loud I thought it might wake the room. Micah was just across the way. He was only 7. He was curled up tight, gripping a plush T-Rex that had lost an eye somewhere along the way. His chest rose and fell in that heavy, trusting rhythm of kids who haven't realized yet that life has teeth. A heavy stone of regret settled in my gut. The kid had been my shadow lately. Everywhere I went, he trailed like a stray, begged for bedtime stories. He'd sneak me the fresh cookies from the mess hall. He was the closest thing to family I had left, but dragging him into the cold wasn't an option. Neither was a goodbye. Secrets don't keep in a place like this. He might panic or worse, alert the wardens. I lingered by his bunk for a heartbeat, just watching him rest. His little hand squeezed that threadbare toy. His mouth twitched, hopefully chasing a happy dream. "Forgive me," I breathed, barely stirring the air. "I hope you find your people." Then I hoisted my pack and ghosted toward the exit. The corridor was an abyss, broken only by the bloody hue of the emergency signs. The floorboards felt like landmines waiting to detonate. Every groan of the wood paralyzed me. I expected a hand on my shoulder, a shout, something, but the silence held. I navigated the minefield by memory, skipping the loose planks. I skirted the rec room with its battered sofas and prehistoric TV set, slipped by the galley which held the stale aroma of whatever slop they'd served hours ago, crept past Patterson's den. His snoring vibrated through the timber. My target was the east door, way down at the perimeter. At the threshold I leaned in, ear against the freezing steel, straining for trouble. Only the storm answered, a constant rhythmic drumming. I inhaled, shut my eyes, sent a silent plea to the universe, and cracked the seal. The temperature slapped me instantly. It wasn't just a chill, it was a physical assault. A damp freeze that ignores skin and goes straight for the marrow, tightening around the skeleton. The deluge was immediate and unforgiving. It soaked my layers and plastered my hair to my skull in seconds. I slipped out, easing the latch shut. Silence. The sensor didn't trip. I paused in the downpour, letting the weight of the decision settle on my shoulders. Liberty, or whatever version of it a 14-year-old fugitive with zero itinerary can claim. I yanked my hood up, a useless gesture since I was already waterlogged, and began the march. I hugged the brickwork until the forest edge offered cover. The shadows beneath the canopy were total, interrupted only by the jagged flash of distant storms. Safely in the timber, I indulged in one backward glance. Just one. The institution loomed in the wet dark. Massive, brick with golden light spilling from a handful of panes. They were eager with the holidays this year. A wreath hung on the main entry, and blinking red and green bulbs traced the gutter line. From a distance, it mimicked comfort. It almost tricked you into thinking it was a real home. A terrified fragment of my brain screamed to return, to crawl back under the blankets and feign ignorance. Instead, I pivoted and walked away. Briarwood wasn't much of a town. Maybe 8,000 souls, an island in a sea of agriculture and woodlands. I had the map memorized from bus rides and the rare field trip. The central strip had the usual suspects, a market, a few storefronts, and the greasy spoon where they took us for birthdays. I steered clear of civilization. I hugged the gravel lanes and field margins, ready to dive behind haystacks or into drainage ditches at the first sign of high beams. The storm was my armor and my enemy. It kept the streets clear of witnesses, but it was sapping my heat fast. The shivering started around 1 in the morning. By 1:30, my hands were numb blocks of ice. I forced one foot in front of the other, chanting a silent mantra that quitting wasn't on the table. Then, around 2 o'clock in the morning, beams of light cut the dark. I was navigating a desolate patch of asphalt, assuming I was the only soul for miles, when the glow crowned the hill behind me. It wasn't a civilian car. The light bar on the roof was unmistakable even before the red and blue strobes hit. My chest tightened instantly. I dove blindly into the roadside trench, splashing down into half a foot of freezing, murky sludge. I buried my nose in the wet soil, holding my breath and playing dead. The squad car decelerated as it approached. Gravel popped under the tires as it crept by, the engine barely turning over. A searchlight swept the tall grass above me, slicing the air just inches from my hiding spot. They'd spotted something, a shadow, a glitch in the night. I flattened myself against the mud and begged the universe to erase me from existence. Time suspended, every second dragging out like an hour. Then, static burst from the radio inside the cruiser. Dispatch barked something about a family fight over on Oak Street. The searchlight winked out. The motor roared to life, and the taillights faded into the distance. I lay in that muck for another 10 minutes, vibrating with terror and chill, soaked to the skin. When I finally dragged myself out, I was caked in filth, shivering violently, and more terrified than I had ever been. But I wasn't in handcuffs. I marched on. By 2:30 in the morning, the adrenaline crash hit me hard. The tremors were getting dangerous. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached, and walking in a straight line became a chore. My hands were useless blocks of ice. My mind started drifting. I recalled a biology lesson about the stages of freezing to death, how the confusion sets in first, followed by an overwhelming desire to just close your eyes and rest. Nap time felt like a great idea, but I knew laying down in this storm meant dying. I had to find a roof. That's when the shape emerged. Tucked away from the highway, obscured by a thicket of brambles and rotting fence posts, stood an old homestead. Even through the gloom and downpour, the place screamed vacancy. No lights, just a yard surrendered to wild grass. A real estate sign lay face down in the dirt, so bleached by the sun that the agent's name was gone. Next to the main house sat a massive barn, its wood weathered to a shade of dusty rose. One corner of the roof had caved in, but the main structure looked solid. Crucially, it looked dry. I waded through the knee-high weeds, my sneakers squelching with every heavy step, legs burning with fatigue. The bay door was slightly ajar, hanging off rusted hinges. I squeezed through the gap and shut the world out behind me. The scent washed over me. Straw, dry rot, ancient dust, and the heavy feeling of time standing still. But under that there was a smell of safety. It felt almost welcoming. I fumbled with my pack, fingers numb, until I managed to toggle my flashlight. The yellow beam cut the shadows, illuminating a space that was once efficient but had long since resigned itself to decay. Vacant livestock pens lined the wall. Antique tools hung on pegs, their iron turned orange with oxidation. In the far corner, a chaotic pile of fodder remained, some bales toppled, others still stacked in a block. I scrambled up the mound, tossing aside the mildewed layers until I found straw that wasn't damp. I built a nest, burrowing into the driest corner of the loft and piling loose hay over myself for insulation. It wasn't warm, but it was shelter. For the first time since kicking open that emergency exit, I let myself stop. Surrounded by the scent of dry grass and the rhythmic drumming of rain on the shingles, my body finally gave up. Quiet woke me. The storm had passed. Pale, dusty sunbeams sliced through the gaps in the siding, striping the floor. For a heartbeat, the location made no sense. Then the memories crashed back in, bringing the heavy reality of my life with them. I was a fugitive, soaked, freezing, and squatting in a ruin in the middle of nowhere with zero plan. I sat up, my joints screaming. Every muscle was locked up. My clothes were still damp, clinging to my skin like cold seaweed. My empty stomach roared. A reminder I hadn't seen food since yesterday's dinner, but I was breathing. I eased myself down from the loft, testing the rot on the wooden ladder before trusting it with my weight. Daylight stripped the barn of its mystery, leaving only melancholy. It was a tomb for a life that used to exist here, now left to the weather. I unwrapped a granola bar and nursed it, chewing slowly to fool my belly into feeling full. I had enough rations for maybe 14 days if I was disciplined. After that, I couldn't live on scavenged snacks forever. The issue was that I'd bolted without looking past the exit sign. Where does a 14-year-old go without family, money, or a legal identity? If I drifted to the next town, I'd eventually have to deal with school registration. The system would flag me in a heartbeat. Landing honest work wasn't in the cards either. I had painted myself into a corner, and the paint was still wet. Priorities, though. I had to get my bearings and decide if this sanctuary was actually secure. Shoving the heavy timber door aside, I stepped out into the daylight. The sight that greeted me was unexpectedly breathtaking. I suppose I had braced myself for something else entirely. I anticipated sheer desolation, rubble and rot, and sure, the signs of neglect were abundant. Posts leaned drunkenly in the dirt, and the wild growth in the pastures stood taller than I did. An ancient, oxidized tractor rested in the tall fescue, slowly surrendering its metal bones back to the soil. Yet, beneath the layers of time and indifference, a quiet elegance remained. Anchoring the homestead was the main house, a two-story grand dame with a sweeping veranda and dormers that whispered of its former glory. The whitewash was shedding in long ribbons, exposing the weathered gray timber underneath like old scars. Makeshift patches of cardboard and poly-sheeting flapped uselessly over shattered panes. The stairs leading up were treacherous, missing planks requiring a leap of faith, yet the skeleton of the place felt sturdy. It was evident in the unyielding verticality of the framing. The masonry held firm, and the roofline, despite losing a few scales, refused to bow. Whoever constructed this sanctuary intended for it to endure generations. There was devotion hammered into every beam. Past the homestead, the earth undulated in soft waves of amber and dun, the slumbering pastures waiting for spring. Far off, a charcoal strip of timber broke the view, giving way to the endless flat prairie of Nebraska reaching for the skyline. I took a leisurely circuit of the grounds, cataloging what remained. A hen house slumped defeatedly to the left, its fencing twisted and corroded by the elements. An archaic hand pump stood guard over a well. It looked seized up, but offered a glimmer of hope for water. The footprint of a kitchen garden lay buried under thistles, though the phantom outlines of planting beds were still discernible. A gravel track vanished into the brush, barely hinting at a path to the highway. Eyeballing the spread, I figured it spanned roughly 80 acres, give or take. Civilization, or at least the next soul, seemed a good half-mile distant. I could just make out a blur of a structure against the slate clouds. It was clear this patch of earth had been forsaken for seasons. No hands had tended it. Solitude meant safety, and possession meant survival. With a tentative step, I drew closer to the porch. The rear entrance was bolted, yet the jamb had turned to pulp. A single determined shove snapped the wood with a sharp report, granting access. I stood paralyzed, pulse thundering in my ears, expecting a shout or a siren to shatter the silence. Only the groan of settling timber answered. Crossing the threshold, the atmosphere enveloped me, heavy and particulate. It carried the stagnation of a sealed tomb, that musk of uncirculated air. Yet, an undertone lingered, an echo of vitality. Hints of hearth fires and Sunday roasts, the olfactory residue of a life lived together. The galley was spacious, a testament to a time when it was the warm heart of the home. China remained visible behind glazed cupboard doors, arranged with precision, as if the table might be set at any moment. Skillets and saucepans dangled from the rack over a hulking iron range. The larder still held tins, their contents a mystery behind bleached-out wrappers. I drifted through the hallway, gathering clues from the wreckage. A masonry hearth dominated the parlor, flanked by furniture shrouded in white drop-cloths, spectral forms guarding the upholstery beneath. Floor-to-ceiling shelving occupied the far wall, packed tight. The bindings were sun-bleached, yet the gold lettering on the spines remained legible. Agricultural guides, paperback love stories, a well-thumbed scripture. Above the firebox sat a collection of frames. I approached, wiping away the grime with my cuff to see the faces. An elderly couple, likely in their 60s, posed proudly before this very structure. In the snapshot, the veranda gleamed with fresh gloss, the flower beds rioted with color, and the perimeter fence stood at attention. Their joy was genuine, crinkling the corners of their eyes. She held his arm with the easy comfort of a long shared journey. Further along the shelf, portraits of their offspring told the rest of the story. Caps and gowns, bridal veils, Yuletide mornings with toddlers tearing into gifts, candled confections celebrating another year of life. A snapshot captured a lad hoisting a catch that rivaled his own size, beaming with a fisherman's triumph. Mundane miracles arrested in silver, the metal now darkened by oxidation. I stood transfixed by these windows into the past. This structure was more than shelter. It was a vessel of humanity. These timbers had absorbed joy and dispute, festive feasts, and the slow quiet of Sabbath dawns. Infants became adults within these confines. Generations returned to visit. Affection had been a permanent resident here. Where had they gone? Why surrender such a treasure to the elements? The answers were lost. Yet, gazing at their contentment, a heavy realization settled in my gut. I was an intruder in their sanctuary, an uninvited guest in their history. I was squatting on their sacred ground. But perhaps, in exchange for shelter, I could offer a little reverence. Perhaps I could act as a guardian for this ruin, if only for a season. I could stand between it and total collapse. It was a way to pay respects to the souls who constructed this sanctuary, cherished it, and were eventually compelled to flee. It wasn't a strategy, really, hardly a blueprint at all, but it gave me a purpose. 3 sleeping quarters occupied the second floor. In the primary suite, an expansive mattress lay beneath a bleached quilt, smoothed out as though expecting the proprietors to walk in at any moment. Specks of dust pirouetted in the sunbeams streaming through glass that, against all odds, hadn't shattered. At the vanity, the looking-glass was so tarnished by time that it rendered me as a specter rather than flesh and blood. It was obvious a young lad had claimed the next space. Miniature aircraft suspended by fishing wire dangled overhead, swaying in the breeze my arrival created. Images of diamond legends, likely from the 1980s, adhered stubbornly to the plaster, their edges peeling away. Awards lined a ledge. Tokens from youth sports, track meets, and vocabulary contests. An entire youth frozen in synthetic materials and discolored fabric. The final bedroom was modest, a visitor's nook with plain furnishings and a solitary cot. It lacked the intimacy of the other spaces, which meant fewer phantom memories to contend with. This spot became my sanctuary. I removed the ancient covers and raided a corridor cupboard for sheets. They smelled of stale air, but were free of grime. After giving them a vigorous airing, I arranged the sleeping quarters. There was a comfort in the domesticity of it, a touch of normalcy. A marvelous realization followed. The plumbing still functioned. The liquid sputtered forth, orange with oxidation, coughing as if shocked to be summoned after such a hiatus. Drinking it was out of the question, but it served well for scrubbing the dirt from my skin and garments. These minor luxuries restored a sense of dignity. Electricity, however, was absent. The grid had been disconnected ages ago, naturally. Yet, I possessed a torch, and a search of the culinary drawers yielded vintage wax tapers and a carton of lucifers that still struck true. When twilight descended on my inaugural 24 hours at the homestead, I huddled in the spare bed, swathed in musty wool, dining on a dry oat bar by the flame's glow. Beyond the pane, the heavens revealed themselves, a density of stellar bodies unlike anything I had witnessed before. A limitless grandeur spanning the void that rendered me both insignificant and eternal. My mind drifted to Micah. He was likely puzzling over my disappearance. I prayed his anxiety wasn't too severe. I wished for him to grasp in some vague way the necessity of my departure. I imagined the Riverside employees filling out paperwork, perhaps distributing those missing flyers I knew existed. A fragment of my conscience stung over the disturbance I'd created, yet the majority of my being remained numb. Reflections of my mother surfaced. She was likely in Arizona with Rick, and in all probability, I didn't cross her mind at all. Then I contemplated the figures in the snapshots downstairs, the architects of this dwelling who reared their offspring and aged side by side within this shelter. I will watch over this, I murmured to the shadows. The duration is uncertain, but I will tend to your residence. It was a vow offered to strangers in a location where I was essentially a trespasser. Yet, for the first instance in ages, my actions felt justified. I settled into a rhythm as the week progressed. Rising with the dawn became necessary. Without power, alarms were useless, and lying in the dark served no purpose. In any case, I would consume a meager morning meal from my shrinking stockpile, constantly portioning, acutely conscious of my scarcity. Then, the scrubbing began. I located an antique floor brush in a pantry and cleared every chamber on the ground level. The accumulation of grit was staggering. I was forced to bind a shirt over my nose and mouth to prevent asphyxiation. Gradually, however, the structure started to emerge from under the filth. I cleansed crockery in frigid water and tidied the food storage area. I cleared spider silk from the angles and scrubbed the sills. Beating the grime from the draped furnishings revealed the elegance hidden underneath. There was a plush emerald seat, a divan with ornate timber feet, and a rocker that sang a wooden tune when occupied. I moved my efforts to the exterior veranda. Repairing the crumbled stairs exceeded my skill set, but I could remove the rubble, broom the decking, and uproot the vegetation encroaching through the slats. Discovering a tool in the outbuilding allowed me to secure wobbly fasteners and reattach a blind that was dangling precariously. The labor was grueling and bodily, the sort that left my limbs throbbing and skin raw. I cherished every moment. For the first time in 3 years, I had a function. I wasn't an encumbrance or a dilemma to be solved or a mere statistic in a dossier. I was engaged in genuine, tactile efforts, actions that held significance, if only in my own eyes. The homestead seemed to answer my devotion. It sounds peculiar, I know, but the sensation was distinct. The more care I poured in, the more it appeared to embrace me. The residence no longer felt forsaken. Rather, it resembled a dormant creature rousing from slumber. The shed transformed into my studio, a place to sort implements and scheme about upcoming tasks. Even the wild thicket of a yard appeared less anarchic as I cleared the dead weight. I began conversing with the structure, the portraits on the ledge, and the land itself. "I tidied the scullery this morning," I would announce to the image of the grinning pair. "You certainly possessed an abundance of plates. I imagine your evenings were loud, filled with passing plates and pulling up extra chairs. An open-door policy for strays. That sort of warmth keeps the silence at bay. It doesn't fix everything, of course. That deep ache for belonging never really leaves you, but kindness makes it bearable enough to see another sunrise. My ritual was always the same. Huddled under a moth-eaten quilt on the front stoop, counting constellations until my eyes got heavy. By day 5, the snack supply hit 0. It wasn't a surprise, just an inevitable deadline. Even with strict portion control, hunger doesn't negotiate. I was running on fumes and had to venture back into civilization to restock. Hiking into Briarwood proper was a solid 60-minute trek. I aimed for that midday sweet spot, crowded enough to blend in as background noise, but quiet enough to dodge direct interactions. With my hoodie pulled tight and gaze fixed on the pavement, I looked like any other moody adolescent avoiding the world. Hanson's Market was distinctively local, complete with handwritten sale posters in the window and an entry chime that announced every arrival. I snagged a plastic carrier and speed-walked past the shelves. The list was practical. Shelf-stable staples like peanut butter, sliced loaf, crisp apples, and a water jug. No fridge meant no perishables. Strictly fuel, no luxuries. The register rang up $18.47. I handed over a wad of wrinkled cash and coins, keeping my eyes low. The exhausted clerk, a middle-aged woman, was too drained to pay me any mind. Exiting past the post office, a community notice board caught my attention and froze me in my tracks. Buried between offers for music tutoring and a lost tabby was a sheet of paper featuring my own portrait. Missing, Ren Callaway. They used an old-school portrait. The girl in the ink looked innocent, untouched by the grit of the last few months. Her hair was combed perfectly, wearing that polite, forced grin you manufacture for photographers. Age 14. Last seen at Riverside Children's Home here in Briarwood. Standard contact numbers at the bottom. I lingered there, studying the image. That name, that face, it felt like looking at a stranger or a ghost. That version of me still had this foolish optimism that she was wanted. She thought a foster family might actually pick her, that the bureaucracy functioned. The runaway staring at the paper had learned the hard truth. A quick scan of the street confirmed I was unobserved. People walked right past these tragedies and announcements without a second glance. Snatching the sheet from the cork, I crushed it into my jacket pocket and started the long trek back to the only sanctuary I'd known in 3 years. Stepping onto the weed-choked path to the house, a strange sensation washed over me. It took a second to place it. Serenity. Not quite joy and certainly not security, but a cousin to both. It was like watching a sprout break through winter soil. Delicate, yet stubborn. I had a destination and a reason to open my eyes at dawn. It might look like nothing to most, but when you're empty-handed, it feels like a kingdom. If you're still listening, I appreciate you more than you know. Seriously, thank you. The internet is full of infinite distractions and louder voices. Yet you chose to sit with a 14-year-old squatter in a derelict house. That kind of solidarity hits deep. I'm curious about something, so drop a note below if you're comfortable sharing. Have you ever ended up somewhere by mistake, only to realize it was exactly where you belonged? Could be a random job, a city you never planned on visiting, or a friendship that came out of nowhere. Sometimes the universe gives us what we need rather than what we want. I'd love to read your experiences. I go through every response, and your words might just be the lifeline another viewer is looking for. If this resonates with you, feel free to stick around. Click the subscribe notification so we can keep this conversation going. Honestly, we are only at the beginning. I assumed locating shelter was the main hurdle. I was mistaken. The real challenge was just around the corner. 3 weeks bled into 4. Then December hit, bringing a frost that ignored the walls and settled deep in the bones of the house. Sub-zero nights became the norm. I survived by layering every garment I owned and burying myself under piles of fabric, watching my breath fog up the room. Despite the chill I was breathing, I was independent. My face vanished from the telephone poles covered up by Christmas pageant schedules and craft fair advertisements. The search seemed to fizzle out. To the state, I was just another statistic, lost in a sea of files they didn't have the manpower to close. Caution became my second nature, making my supply runs rare and surgical. I never walked the same path back to back, and I made sure to switch up the hours. Head lowered, fabric pulled tight around my face, invisibility was the goal. There was a little stream running about a half-mile out. I hauled water from there and purified it over the stove in a battered saucepan scavenged from the cupboards. Darkness hid the smoke, so I waited for nightfall to kindle tiny fires behind the house, soaking up the heat from the embers right before trying to sleep. Security and comfort were distant dreams, yet I claimed this space. Piece by piece, the old homestead was waking up under my care. I'd scrubbed the stillness out of every corner. Dust sheets were folded away, glass cleared of grime, and the floorboards swept clean enough to walk on. A rusted toolbox from the shed helped me patch up the worst of the decay. I tightened hinges and steadied shaking table legs, though the entryway stairs were beyond saving. I laid down some sturdy planks to bypass the rot. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. Staying busy was my anchor. If my hands were moving, my mind couldn't dwell on the crushing silence. The temperature, however, was an enemy I couldn't outwork. My thin layers were losing the battle against the chill. Dawn often found me rattling uncontrollably, jaw sore from clenching. It took half the morning just to thaw my hands enough to grip a spoon. I wasn't naive about the freeze. I knew how hypothermia creeps in like a thief, stealing your warmth before you even know it's gone. Desperation demanded better gear, but with only $30 to my name, a shopping trip was out of the question. Besides, a 14-year-old buying heavy winter gear alone screams runaway. I couldn't risk a kind stranger asking where my parents were. Then my thoughts turned to the space above the ceiling, the one place I'd deliberately ignored. The hatch ladder seemed like a death trap, all split grain and ominous creaks. More than the danger, it felt like trespassing. Basements are for storage, but the space under the rafters is where families hide their hearts, the memories they can't bear to toss but don't want to see every day. Survival, however, doesn't leave much room for politeness. When December arrived with ice blooming on the interior glass and the air turning to steam with every exhale, I tugged the cord and ascended into the gloom. It was tight up there, smelling of old paper and stillness, packed floor to ceiling with a lifetime of leftovers. Teetering towers of cartons loomed in the shadows, marked in scrawling ink, holiday ornaments, infant wear, financial documents. Files spanning 1985 to 1990. There were cast-off chairs, a headless mannequin, and a fractured toy horse, ghosts of a family that had grown up and moved on. Tucked away in the dimmest nook under a grime-coated pane rested a massive chest reinforced with brass. My pulse quickened as I dropped to my knees next to it, sensing something important. It was clearly an heirloom, bearing the monogram EA and CA etched into the timber, the very same letters painted on the postbox out by the road. These were the owners, the faces in the frames below. I tried the clasp. It resisted, frozen by time, but it wasn't secured. With a held breath, I heaved the top open. It was a goldmine of warmth. Garments neatly stacked, protected by the sharp scent of cedar wood. Thick, knitted pullovers in shades of forest pine and deep wine red. Vintage base layers that felt substantial. Heavy socks woven by hand with complex designs and buried at the bottom. The prize, a heavy coat. It was cut for a grown woman and would swallow me whole, but the wool was genuine and the interior was thickly padded. It carried the aroma of the chest mixed with a faint, sweet floral note, a ghost of perfume. I clutched the fabric tight, hit by a wave of emotion I couldn't parse. It felt like salvation, like being wrapped in a hug by a stranger who had prepared this safety net years before I was even born. This was her wardrobe, the matriarch from the pictures. Edith, assuming the initials stood for her, had stored these away against the seasons, never suspecting they would one day keep a shivering fugitive alive. Thank you. the words slipped out into the silence. I thanked her spirit, fate, or just my lucky stars. But as I looked back, I saw the chest wasn't empty yet. Hidden under the layers, swaddled in soft silk, lay a stack of envelopes bound in faded blue. Next to them rested a diary bound in leather, the name Edith Ashford stamped in gold. That should have been my cue to close the lid. I knew I was invading a stranger's soul, but the isolation was crushing me, and I was starving for any kind of human connection. I needed to feel a presence, even if it was just an echo from the past. Swathed in her oversized wool jacket, I settled onto the floorboards and began to read. The papers chronicled a decades-long conversation between a mother and her brood. 3 names appeared again and again: Walter, the firstborn, Karen, in the middle, and Thomas, the baby of the family. At first, the ink spoke of joy. Birthday parties, holiday logistics, and the sweet, mundane chaos of raising a family. Karen wrote of climbing the corporate ladder in Seattle, while Thomas shared the thrill of a second baby on the way. Walter discussed big plans to grow his building company. But as I moved through the timeline, the mood darkened. I found a note from 18 years prior, penned in Edith's precise script where the trouble began. Dearest Karen, I can't find the right way to say this. I've started a dozen drafts and crumpled every single one, but the silence has to end, even if I can't bring myself to speak the words aloud. I'll trust this paper to carry them to you gently. We've lost Walter. It was a Tuesday. The tractor up on the north slope. You know the spot. Your father always warned it was too steep. The brakes failed. It was over before we could even get to him. Your father hasn't said a word since we laid him to rest. He just haunts the porch, staring out at nothing. I can't reach him. I can't even find my own footing. To break your heart this way kills me. I am so sorry. Signed, Your Mother. I lowered the page. My hands were shaking, and the chill in the room had nothing to do with it. Walter, the firstborn, gone in his 40s. The farm claimed him. My mind flashed to the rusted hulk of machinery I'd passed in the high grass, half swallowed by the earth. Was that the beast that did it? Had they left it there to rot because dragging it back was too painful? I took a breath and read on. The correspondence that followed chronicled a family unraveling in slow motion. Chester never really came back from that day. He withered away. He retreated from the land, from his wife, from existence itself. Edith tried to carry the load, but she was drowning, and the children were too anchored in their own distant lives to return. Skipping ahead 12 years. Karen, honey, thanks for the birthday card. It was good to see your handwriting. I know the job keeps you busy, truly. Flights from Seattle cost a fortune and take forever. I'm not trying to guilt trip you, but your dad asks for you daily. He's failing. The chart says heart failure, but I know a broken spirit when I see one. He aches for Walter. He aches for all of you. If you could manage a Christmas visit, just a couple of days, it would save him. All my love, Mom. There was no reply in the stack to confirm if she ever made the trip. 3 years later, the stationery changed. Black borders, the universal signal of mourning. Chester was gone. Edith was the last one standing. The final bundle was the most gut-wrenching. Karen begging her mother to sell up. Mom, listen, you are 78. Dad isn't there to help. You can't run that place solo. Look at the brochure for the facility again, please. Sunridge is barely a 40-minute drive from me. I'd be there every week. You deserve to stop working. The land isn't going anywhere. We'll sort the estate later. I just need you safe. Let me be the caretaker for a change, please. Love, Karen. Then I found the diary. Edith's inner monologue, penned in that same meticulous script I'd come to know. Mostly dull stuff. Frost warnings, shopping needs, doctor visits. But the last page from 3 years back stopped me cold. November 15th, Dr. Morrison pulled my license, says my eyes and reflexes are shot. He's not wrong, but the idea of being stranded here, trapped, it's suffocating. Karen is pushing the nursing home, sent another pamphlet, glossy photos of seniors gluing crafts and playing games. It looks like a polite waiting room for the grave. I know I'm being stubborn. She's scared for me, but I've given 50 years to this soil. We built a universe here, raised babies. Buried a son. The walls hold the memories. The dirt holds my heart. How do you walk away from that? Chester is gone. The kids are gone. The silence is so heavy I sometimes forget I have a voice. I chat with his picture, narrate my morning. Maybe I'm senile, maybe just lonely. The place is falling apart. Fences are rotting, roof is leaking, the garden is a jungle, I watch it decay. And I feel like I'm rotting right along with it. But I can't go, not yet. I wonder about the strangers who will walk these halls next. When I'm dead, someone else will stand here. Will they see a teardown? An investment? Or will they feel what was here? I hope they feel the warmth. I hope they know this wasn't just a structure but a sanctuary. A vessel for life with all the mess and joy that comes with it. If you are reading this, whoever you are, realize you are treading on hallowed ground. Not church holy, but the kind of holy that comes from deep, enduring love. I don't know my future. I don't know the future of this farm. I just pray the next keeper treats it gently. Someone who intimately knows the ache of needing a safe harbor. I shut the leather-bound book, overwhelmed. Tears streamed down my face for Edith, for Chester, and for their boy Walter, a life cut tragically short. My heart broke for the kids who never made it back. The ones too caught up in their own orbits to share a porch swing and a sunset with parents whose time was running out. I mourned for the land itself, forsaken and overlooked, slowly being swallowed back up by the wild earth. Mostly, I cried for myself. In that moment, the realization hit me hard. Edith and I were cut from the same cloth. We were both discarded. We were both isolated. We were both starving for a kindness the world simply refused to offer. Yet, she had bequeathed me a gift. She didn't mean to, didn't even know I existed, but she saved me anyway. Garments to fend off the freeze, written words to anchor my mind. A house begging for a caretaker to show it some affection. Destiny never seemed real to me, at least not until now. But huddled in that grimy attic, swaddled in a stranger's wool coat while devouring her secrets, I felt a bond that defies logic. Edith had prayed for a guardian for her sanctuary. And somehow, against every probability, I was the one who showed up. Let's take a beat here. Have you ever sensed a tie to a person you never actually knew? Maybe an ancestor gone before your time, a writer who peered into your soul, or a stranger whose struggles mirrored your own. Those unseen links are powerful. If you recognize that feeling, share your story down below. And if this journey resonates with you, hit that subscribe button, because the next part, it flipped my world upside down. December 23rd rolled around. I'd been squatting at the homestead for 5 full weeks. 35 days of scraping by, scrubbing floors, and coaxing this derelict shell back into something that felt alive. The freeze was merciless, but Edith's wardrobe was a lifesaver, and I had become an expert at scavenging food and rationing heat. That morning found me in the barn, jury-rigging a busted shelf with rusted gear and pure improvisation. That structure was my sanctuary, the one spot where I felt useful and strong. I had tidied the equipment, swept the dust, and tinkered just to stay busy. Then, a noise cut through the silence and froze my marrow. Tires crunching on gravel. I went rigid. Every instinct screamed, thoughts scattering like a flock of startled pigeons. Game over, I was discovered. Cops, social workers, anyone who would drag me back to Riverside and throw away the key. Heart hammering, I scrambled up the ladder to the hayloft. Peering through a crack in the siding, I watched a pickup truck roll into the yard. A vintage Ford F-150. Faded navy paint, high mileage, but clearly loved. It idled near the porch, and a man stepped out. He was elderly, 70s I guessed, but he still carried himself with the size and strength of a younger man. He sported a canvas chore coat, mud-caked boots, and a baseball cap so sun-bleached the red had turned soft pink. His skin looked like tanned hide, and he moved with the stiff precision of bad knees and old injuries. He paused there for a long beat, studying the main house. Then he began a perimeter check, and my anxiety curdled into heavy dread. He wasn't missing a thing. The tidy deck, the sparkling glass, the sorted workbench in the open barn, the wisp of smoke from my campfire. The signs were everywhere. He knew he wasn't alone. Approaching the forced-open back door, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. I had a split second to act. I could stay buried in the hay and let him make the call. Maybe he would bail without checking the barn. Maybe I could bolt for the timberline before the sirens came. Or I could walk out there. I'm not sure why, but the second option pulled at me. Maybe I was done running. Done disappearing. Deep down, I think I knew this showdown was inevitable. No use putting it off. I slid down from the loft, crossed the barn floor, and stepped out into the weak winter light. The stranger whipped around, phone in hand. We froze, separated by 20 feet of frostbitten grass. His gaze was piercing, steel blue eyes that held a lifetime of memory. "Don't call the cops, please." My voice sounded tiny, trembling like a child's. "I'm leaving. I'm gone. Just give me 10 minutes to grab my gear." He stood like a statue, studying me. He took in the oversized coat, the grime, the panic. "How long?" It wasn't a shout. It was soft, almost intrigued. 5 weeks, I whispered. His expression shifted, shock, perhaps, or something harder to place. 5 weeks, he echoed. "By yourself?" I just nodded, throat too tight to speak. He slid the mobile device slowly into his coat pocket, and then he dropped a statement that completely blindsided me. "Walk me through it. Show me your work. I want the full tour." My brain stuttered. This went against the script. The script said he calls the sheriff, I get cuffed, and I get shipped back to state care. That is the standard operating procedure for adults catching strays in vacant buildings. But he wasn't dialing anyone. He was asking to see the house. So I obliged. I guided him through the farmhouse, room by room, pointing out every task I had completed. The floors scrubbed of grime, the glass wiped clear, the kitchen brought to order, the dust sheets folded away, and the makeshift repairs I'd managed with grit and rusted tools. He remained mostly silent, offering the occasional nod, running a weathered hand over a door jamb, checking the swing of a cabinet I'd rehinged. When we arrived at the spare bedroom where I'd been crashing, he stopped dead. He took in the tight hospital corners on the bed, my small stack of treasures on the dresser, and the closet where I'd sorted Edith's wardrobe by season and fabric. "You've been surviving like this for 5 weeks?" he asked, his voice rough. "In the freezing cold? No power? Scavenging for meals? It beats the alternative." The words slipped out before I could check them. It was the raw, jagged truth. He pivoted to face me then. He really studied me. And I saw a look in his eyes I hadn't received in years. It looked like recognition, like he actually understood. "Come on," he muttered. "Let's sit in the truck. It's got heat. I get the feeling you have a history." His name was Silas Thornton. He was 75, a retired dirt farmer, and he had been tight with the Ashford clan for 4 decades. He and his wife, Bet, lived 10 miles down the road. He'd sworn to Edith he'd keep an eye on the homestead when she went into the nursing home. "I haven't exactly lived up to my word," he confessed. "Retirement is busier than you'd think. I let this slide." We sat in his cab with the vents blasting. For the first time in 35 days, the chill left my bones. But it wasn't just the heater. It was a thaw deep in my chest. A warmth that reached the frozen parts of my soul that the weather couldn't touch. He didn't push. He just gave me space. And eventually, the dam broke. I spilled it all. My mother and Rick entering the system at 11, the foster rotation that failed, the group homes that felt like minimum security wings, and Riverside. I described that terrifying sensation of fading away, becoming invisible, just a case file waiting to age out and vanish. I told him about the escape, the freezing rain, and dodging the patrol car. How I stumbled on this farm and chose to stay. How reading Edith's letters and diary made me feel less alone, connected to a woman I'd never known. When I ran out of words, Silas let the silence hang there. The heater whirred and a crow cawed from the barren branches outside. "Edith Ashford was a saint," he finally murmured. Her and Chester both. They cherished this dirt. Aside from their kin, this farm was their heart. Leaving it nearly killed her. He looked out the windshield at the peeling porch. Her daughter, Karen, got the deed when Edith passed. She's been talking about doing something with it for ages. Selling, renovating, something. But she's up in Seattle with her own brood, and this place falls to the bottom of the list. So, it sits. He turned back to me. "It sits here rotting, dying, forgetting what it was, until you showed up." I was mute. I didn't know if there were words for that. Silas reached for his phone again, and my stomach dropped. This was it, the moment he called the police. But he didn't punch in 911. He found a contact name. "Karen," he barked when the line picked up. "It's Silas Thornton. I'm out at your mom's place. You need to hear this." I sat paralyzed, listening to his half of the call. He narrated the situation, the clean house, the repairs, the runaway girl who'd been the caretaker for a month while the property sat neglected. I couldn't hear Karen, but I watched Silas nodding. I watched his face cycle through emotions. Shock, worry, and then, strangely, a look that resembled relief. "Hang on," he said, "putting you on speaker." He leveled the phone between us. A woman's voice filled the cab, weary and thick with emotion, sounding like she was fighting back tears. Is she right there?" "I'm here," I whispered. "What do they call you, honey?" Ren Callaway." Silence stretched out. "Silas told me what you've been doing, looking after Mom's house. The farm I've been too busy and too guilty to visit for 3 years. Panic spiked in my chest. I'm sorry, I blurted. I know it's breaking and entering. I know I have no rights here. I'll pack up. I can be gone today. No. The command was absolute. No, Karen insisted, her voice tight. Please, don't go. The line fell silent, save for the rhythmic rise and fall of her breath. It was a silence so loud I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind. That homestead meant more to my mother than her own heartbeat, leaving it for the assisted living center in Sunridge. Honestly, it broke her spirit completely. It wasn't that the facility was lacking, it was the act of walking away from her sanctuary, abandoning the life she and Dad had constructed from nothing. Like clockwork, she'd ring me up every 7 days, fretting over the land. Was the property being maintained? Had the deer raided her vegetable patch? Had anyone patched that hole in the barn ceiling? I always promised I'd sort it out, swore I'd drive up and check on things, but I never made the trip. Life always just got in the way. After she passed, the remorse was a physical weight. I couldn't even look at the driveway without breaking down. I heard Karen choke back a sob. For 3 long years, I've pushed it aside. I'll do it tomorrow, or next season. While I stalled, my mother's legacy was slowly rotting away. I was paralyzed, totally unable to confront the reality of it. Now I find out this young drifter has been squatting there for 5 weeks, actually maintaining the place, doing the job I was too cowardly to do. Words failed me. Maybe there weren't any right ones. Silas filled the void. The property is in fine shape, Karen. Honestly, it hasn't looked this cared for in ages. The bones are good, it was built to last, and this kid is respecting that craftsmanship. I can tell you mean it, Karen sighed, the sound heavy over the connection. Ren, you still on the line? Yes, ma'am. I need to ask a favor of Silas, but I need you to get where I'm coming from. I'm not trying to discipline you or enforce laws here. My only goal is your safety while we work out the next steps, all right? All right. She shifted her attention. Silas, will you take her back to your place? Could you and Bet house her for a bit? Just while I navigate the red tape with social services and find a proper path forward. Silas turned his gaze to me. There was warmth in those blue eyes, but also a silent query. He was seeking my go-ahead. I gave a small nod. It was the only option. Way ahead of you, Silas replied. Bet's got a roast in the oven as we speak. We've got more than enough food. Karen's voice came back, softer this time. And Ren, thank you. Thank you for tending to my mom's sanctuary when I failed to. No matter where things go from here, realize you've granted me a gift I didn't even know I was missing. You brought me peace. The call ended. Silas slid the device away and turned the ignition. Right, he murmured. Let's grab your gear and get you out of the cold. 20 minutes down the road, we arrived at a humble ranch house. The lawn was pristine, and festive lights shimmered along the gutters. Wood smoke curled from the chimney stack, and a holiday wreath adorned the entrance. Through the glass, the soft glow of a decorated tree illuminated the front room. The scene was picture perfect, like a Hallmark card or those idyllic households you only see in film, reserved for families without fractures. Silas tapped the horn, and the door swung wide. Bet Thornton appeared, a petite, curvy woman with silver hair pulled tight and spectacles resting on the bridge of her nose. Dusted with flour and wearing a kitchen apron, she was already chattering away before she even made it to the driveway. You poor thing, you have to be famished. Get in here, the roast is done and the bread is resting. Silas rang me. I know the whole story. Don't you fret about a single detail, honey. It'll all work out. She didn't wait for a reply, just guided me through the threshold. The aroma washed over me instantly. Savory meat, roasted veggies, yeast, and sugar. It was the scent of sustenance. Genuine, homemade nourishment. It was a fragrance I hadn't encountered since the days before my mom picked Rick over her own daughter. The interior was toasty and lived in, cluttered with love. Framed memories occupied every shelf. A tabby cat eyed me with skepticism from the top of the couch. A news anchor murmured quietly on the TV. Bet steered me toward the dining area, where 3 settings were already laid out. She filled a glass with milk, no questions asked, slid a saucer of biscuits my way, and instructed me to snack while she plated the main course. I wolfed down 4 of them before my upbringing kicked in, and I made myself pause. Silas returned, having stashed my rucksack in the guest quarters. Filling a mug with Java, he took the seat opposite mine, observing me with an indecipherable look. That room belonged to our boy, he mentioned. Marcus, he's all grown up, moved to Denver with his own family, but we held on to some of his gear just on the off chance. I set some outfits on the mattress for you, Bet chimed in, stirring a pot. They should be your size, old hand-me-downs from Marcus. From his teen years, we never threw anything out, figured someone might have a use for it eventually. I was struck dumb. I'd been in their orbit for under 60 minutes, yet here they were, clothing me in their son's heirlooms, filling my belly, and making up a bed. Why help me? The words tumbled out automatically. Silas and Bet shared a glance. It was that telepathic communication unique to couples who have weathered decades together. Because decency demands it, Silas stated plainly. Bet turned away from the range, drying her palms on the fabric at her waist. Edith was a dear friend, she said softly. She would have wanted you looked after. Honestly, if she were still here, she'd be the one doing this herself. That evening's supper was the finest thing I'd tasted in 3 years. The pot roast was so tender it practically dissolved at the touch of a fork. We had roasted vegetables Bet had saved from her summer garden, alongside a loaf of bread that was still steaming from the oven heat. Dessert was apple pie topped with vanilla ice cream that tasted absolutely divine. I ate until I was full, then forced down a few more bites, convinced the food might vanish if I stopped. Part of me fully expected to snap awake back in that freezing, empty farmhouse. Once we finished eating, Bet guided me to the guest room. It was cozy and spotless, furnished with an actual bed, plush pillows, and a quilt that appeared to be hand-stitched. She had arranged the clothing she promised, neat stacks of denim, sweaters, a thick flannel, and even slippers to keep my feet warm. Bathroom is just down the corridor, she told me. You'll find clean towels in the cupboard. Stay in the shower as long as you need. We just put in a new heater so the hot water won't quit on you. She stopped in the doorway, regarding me with a gentle expression. Ren, you can let your guard down here, no matter what tomorrow brings. Tonight, you are safe. Tonight, you're home. With that, she softly pulled the door shut. I remained standing there for quite a while, staring at the bed and the folded clothes. It was the little things that made the space feel inviting. A vase of dried blooms on the dresser, a Tiffany-style lamp, and a paperback novel resting on the nightstand, waiting for a restless guest. Eventually, I headed to the bathroom and indulged in the longest shower I had ever taken. The scalding water cascaded over me, scrubbing away 5 weeks of grime, terror, and pure survival instinct. I lathered up with a bar of soap that carried the scent of lavender. The shampoo left my hair feeling incredibly silky. I stayed under the spray until the water began to turn tepid, and even then, I lingered a bit longer. When I finally stepped out, I wrapped myself in a towel so plush and absorbent I'd forgotten such luxury existed. Back in the room, I discovered Bet had placed a set of pajamas on the bed. They were brand new, soft, and warm, with the price tag still hanging off them. I slipped them on and crawled under the covers. The linens were crisp, the pillow yielding, and the quilt provided that perfect, heavy warmth. Down the corridor, the low voices of Silas and Bet drifted toward me, the easy, rhythmic murmur of two people who had shared a lifetime. The house settled around me with the creak of timber and the steady drone of the furnace, those little sounds that give a home its heartbeat. Wrapped in that heat, in that solace and surprising generosity, I finally drifted off. It was December 24th, Christmas Eve. For the first time in 3 years, I belonged somewhere. Christmas morning broke with a faint winter sun filtering through curtains I didn't recognize. I lost my bearings for a split second. The mattress felt too plush, the air too toasty. The aroma of brewing coffee and sweet pastries wafted in from down the hall, and my brain couldn't process it. Then it all came flooding back. Silas and Bet, the farmhouse talking to Karen, the roast beef, the shower, and the brand new pajamas. I remained motionless for a long while, terrified to stir. I worried that if I left the room, the illusion would shatter and I'd wake up back in that barn, solitary, living on nothing but granola bars and a prayer. Yet the coffee scent was undeniable, as was the heat. When I finally summoned the nerve to sit up, the room hadn't changed. It was Marcus's old room, but it was mine for as long as this reprieve continued. I pulled on the outfit Bet had provided. The jeans fit more perfectly than anything I'd owned in ages. I buttoned the soft red and black plaid flannel and pulled on heavy wool socks that felt like walking on clouds. Walking into the kitchen, I found Silas seated at the table, nursing a coffee with the newspaper open. Bet was at the stove, turning pancakes on an ancient iron griddle. "Good morning, Ren," she greeted me, her tone so casual it was as if I'd lived there for years. "Hope blueberry pancakes are all right with you," she added. "Silas is obsessed with them." I took a seat, still half convinced this was a hallucination. "Merry Christmas," Silas said, putting his paper aside. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years," I replied honestly. No bad dreams, no shivering in the cold, no straining to hear footsteps or fearing discovery. Just deep, unbroken rest. Once we finished eating, we migrated to the living room. A modest Christmas tree sat in the corner, adorned with craft ornaments and lights blinking in a chaotic rhythm. A handful of wrapped gifts sat at its base. The presents caught me off guard. I hadn't really processed that it was Christmas. The day had lost its significance ages ago, back when my mother was alive, back when I actually had people to celebrate with. Bet passed me a box wrapped in snowman paper. "This one's yours," she said. "It isn't much, but we wanted you to have something to unwrap." I just stared down at the gift in my hands. The package felt light in my hands, pliable beneath the wrapping, and obviously contained fabric. Yet the item itself was secondary. What truly mattered was the realization that I had actually crossed someone's mind. A person had deliberately gone shopping, selected a gift, and wrapped it with my name on the tag. I couldn't recall the last time anyone had done that for me. I peeled the tape back gently, reluctant to destroy the paper. Inside lay a pullover, knitted by hand in a rich evergreen yarn that mirrored the pines standing guard around the old farmhouse. The craftsmanship was undeniable, every stitch intentional. "Bet whipped that up herself," Silas announced. "She only cast on 3 days ago, right after I mentioned you. Barely slept a wink." Bet swatted the air, brushing off the praise. "Oh, hush. I had the body finished for the church bazaar weeks ago," she lied convincingly. "Only needed to knit the sleeves and fix the fit." Despite her deflection, a rosy flush on her cheeks gave away her pride. Beneath the wool lay a heavy-duty torch from Silas, a massive upgrade from the flimsy plastic one I had been relying on. Next came a leather-bound notebook with WC stamped in gold leaf, followed by a framed picture that stole the air right out of my lungs. It was a window into the past, capturing the homestead in its glory days. Paint gleaming, flower beds bursting with color, fence lines standing at attention. Front and center stood Chester and Edith, grinning like two people who had captured lightning in a bottle. "Dug that out of storage," Silas murmured. "Edith passed those boxes on to us ages ago. Figured you ought to see what this land meant to its creators." That was the breaking point. The dam broke, tears surging hot and fast, soaking into the fresh wool resting on my knees. I wept for the couple who built this sanctuary only to lose it to time. I wept for the kindness of these strangers, and for the hollow ache of every solitary holiday behind me, for the empty spaces where family traditions should have been. Bet didn't say a word. She just settled onto the sofa next to me. She wrapped me in a sideways hug, smelling faintly of baking flour and dried lavender, a scent that felt instinctively safe. "No more being on your own, Ren," she whispered, sealing the vow. "You belong here, for however long you need." The stretch between Christmas and New Year's dissolved into a haze of comfort food and tentative trust. Each morning, Silas and I drove out to the property. We tackled legitimate restoration projects, moving far beyond the desperate patch jobs I had attempted while squatting. He instructed me on tool safety, the importance of precise measurements, and the logic of troubleshooting rather than guessing. We repaired the door jamb I had busted through on my first night and swapped out the rotted timber on the veranda. Together, we sealed the leaks in the barn roof and unclogged the drainage gutters. We drafted plans for major renovations, scheduling them for when the spring thaw would allow for supply runs. Yet, the carpentry lessons were secondary to the real gift Silas gave me, a sense of worth. Whenever I managed to fix something or navigate a tricky repair, he offered a quiet, solid affirmation. "Nice job, son. You're a natural. Good thinking." Those simple phrases nourished a part of my soul that had been famished. It silenced the inner voice that insisted I was damaged goods, unwanted and useless. The voice that said I was merely a case file waiting to expire. Silas looked at me and didn't see a burden. He saw raw talent. He saw a future. Back at the house, Bet offered a different curriculum. She taught me the art of cooking, creating meals from scratch rather than just microwaving leftovers, resulting in hearty stews and a slightly lopsided but delicious chocolate cake. I learned the rhythm of household maintenance, from folding sheets so they actually laid flat to managing the laundry rotation. "Living here means pitching in," she told me over a sink full of suds. "That is the difference between a boarding house and a home." I wasn't being served like a visitor. I was being integrated as a member of the clan. That distinction changed everything. We ushered in the new year from the living room, eyes glued to the countdown on the screen like millions of others. At midnight, amidst hugs and handshakes, we ate black-eyed peas, a Southern luck tradition I had never known existed. "Happy New Year, Ren," Silas toasted. "To fresh starts." Echoing the sentiment, I realized I finally had faith in the concept. But turning a page meant facing what was written on the next one. January rolled in, bringing the cold hard truth I had been avoiding: the education system. On January 3rd, my assigned caseworker, Mrs. Dolores Vance, paid us a call. 40-something, with severe wire-rimmed spectacles and a demeanor that screamed bureaucracy. She embodied every terrifying official who had ever controlled my fate. Silas and Bet sat flanking me in the living room while Mrs. Vance sifted through her files, the silence broken only by the rustle of paper. She drilled down into the specifics: where I had hidden, how I managed to stay alive for 5 weeks, and if I grasped the sheer gravity of my transgressions. I didn't hold anything back. I gave her the unvarnished truth. Deception felt heavy and useless now. I was exhausted by the shadows, worn out from the fear, and ready to just lay it all out. When I stopped talking, Mrs. Vance let the silence stretch. Her gaze drifted from Silas to Bet, then settled on me, her face a mask that gave nothing away. "Miss Callaway," she finally said, her voice measured, "you walked a razor's edge, fleeing state care to squat in a derelict building during winter without resources. That is a recipe for tragedy. You understand you could have perished out there?" "Yes, ma'am," I whispered. "Good." She scribbled something down. "Here is where we stand. The Thorntons have filed for emergency foster placement. Considering their reputation in this town, their spotless records, and the unique nature of your situation, I am prepared to sign off on it." My pulse quickened, a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "However," she added, cutting through my relief, "there are strict stipulations. Attendance at school is mandatory. You and I will have a sit-down twice a month. You will abide by every rule under this roof, and you will keep your nose clean. One slip-up, and you go to a secure facility, a place built for flight risks." She lowered her chin, peering over the rims of her spectacles. "Are we clear on these terms?" "Yes, ma'am, crystal clear." The sincerity in my tone must have landed because she gave a curt nod and returned to her notes. "Very well. I will push the paperwork through this week. You are cleared to enroll once the winter holiday concludes." She rose, gathering her things, but hesitated at the threshold. "Miss Callaway, I have been in this line of work for 22 years. I have watched countless children navigate this system. Opportunities for a fresh start like this are rare." She glanced at my new guardians. "Do not squander it." School resumed on January 8th. Briarwood High was a block of red brick straight out of the 1950s, seemingly frozen in time. It housed roughly 400 students, grades 9 through 12, mostly the offspring of local farmers who had worked this land for generations. I was the anomaly, the stranger in a fishbowl where privacy evaporated in days. Silas drove me in on day 1. He idled the truck at the entrance, keeping the doors locked for a moment longer. "Listen," he said, his voice low and steady. "I know this is a mountain to climb. New halls, new faces, restarting your whole life. And people talk. In a town this size, silence is scarce. Folks know everything about everyone, and they aren't always gentle with that knowledge." I nodded, feeling a knot of dread tighten in my gut. "But keep this in mind." He shifted to face me. "Running was a mistake, but you are owning it. You are fixing it. That is bravery, Ren. Anyone who fails to see that does not deserve a second of your time." He squeezed my shoulder, a grounding weight. "Chin up. You have no reason to hang your head." The initial weeks were every bit the gauntlet I had feared. I tried to blend into the scenery, burying myself in textbooks. But blending in is a fantasy when you are the only new face in a crowd that has been together since preschool. The murmurs began before the first bell even rang. I heard the word runaway trailing in my wake. I watched chatter die down the moment I entered a room. I felt eyes boring into me in the lunchroom, snapping away the instant I looked up. It stung. Naturally, it stung. But I had weathered storms worse than idle gossip. I had endured being discarded, forgotten, and shivering through freezing nights in a hollowed-out barn. A few whispers were not enough to shatter me. Then, during the second week, the atmosphere shifted. I was picking at the lunch Bet had made, sitting in solitude, when a shadow eclipsed my table. I glanced up to see a boy looming over me. He looked to be about 16, sporting dirty blonde hair and a smirk that set my nerves on edge. Brennan Holt. The face was familiar. He had been at Riverside, 2 years my senior, before transferring out 6 months prior to my escape. I recalled him vividly. He was a predator, the type who built his stature by tearing others down. "Ren Callaway," he announced, his voice carrying to the nearby tables. "I knew it was you, the runaway from Riverside." My stomach bottomed out. "What's the matter?" He dragged the opposite chair out and made himself comfortable. "Lost your voice, or just terrified these hillbillies will figure out what you really are?" I remained silent. My throat seized tight, my mind racing with images of my fragile new stability crumbling to dust. Brennan leaned in, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that felt far more dangerous than a shout. "Here is how this works. You are going to handle my coursework. Math, English, the works. Do that, and I might just forget to tell the whole school your sad little sob story. You know, the one about how your own mother didn't want you? About how I bolted because the system finally spat me out." The grin he gave me was repulsive, absolutely twisted. "Does that seem right?" Walking back, I felt hollowed out, like someone had winded me. I pushed my supper around the plate. Words stuck in my throat. When Mrs. Thornton asked if I was ill, I nodded. It wasn't exactly a falsehood. I felt physically sick. I was nauseous with dread, humiliated by the realization that my history was a shadow I could never shake, no matter the distance I put between us. Later that evening, a soft rap came at my door. Silas's voice drifted through. "Open to a visitor?" I remained perched on the mattress, gaze fixed on the void. I gave a small nod, keeping my head down, as he entered and settled into the desk chair. Silence stretched between us, not awkward, just heavy. He was an anchor in the room. Eventually he spoke. "Ready to share the burden?" Just like that, the dam broke. Every detail flooded out. I started with Brennan. I explained the blackmail, the demands for schoolwork, and the terror that my new life was crumbling just because a ghost from back then wanted to torment me. Silas absorbed it all, never cutting in. Once I fell silent, he took a moment before responding. "Let me share a thought with you." I gave him the go-ahead. Back when I was a teenager, perhaps a year or two senior to you, I found myself in a bad spot. It wasn't criminal, but it was sufficient to get the local gossip mill churning. Everyone whispered that the Thornton kid was rotten to the core. They claimed I was a lost cause. He stopped, studying his calloused palms. That rejection stung more than I admitted. My instinct was to bolt, to find a clean slate among strangers. My dad caught me before I could and offered a piece of wisdom that stuck. He met my gaze. He told me that history travels with you. Fleeing doesn't work, but interpretation does. You hold the pen. You can allow those memories to be your cage, or you can build something new on top of them. That decision belongs to you. I mulled over his words, realizing that all my fleeing hadn't altered a thing. The rearview mirror always showed the same reflection. My history had simply stalked me, biding its time. "So, how did you handle it?" I inquired. I planted my feet, I put in the labor, I dismantled their assumptions hour by hour. Finally, the whispers died out because the fuel was gone. I grew into the person I envisioned, shedding the caricature they created. He shifted closer. "Ren, you have no reason to hide where you came from. You endured hardships that would have crushed an average man. You've stumbled, certainly, but you're setting things right. That requires a fortitude Brennan Holt has never needed to summon. But how do I handle him?" I pressed. Silas paused. "The strategy is yours to choose. You can capitulate, allowing him to rule you through intimidation, or you can seize the narrative. Speak your truth before he twists it." He rose to exit the room. "No one else holds the copyright to your life. Keep that in mind." Sleep evaded me for the rest of the dark hours. I watched the shadows on the plaster, dissecting Silas's logic regarding flight, narratives, and who owns the interpretation of a life. In the quiet before dawn, resolve settled in. Upon arriving at school, I requested a brief slot at the start of the English lesson to address the class. She seemed taken aback, but gave her consent. As the final chime faded and students settled, I marched to the podium. My fingers trembled and my pulse hammered against my eardrums like a war drum. Brennan lounged in the rear, wearing a self-satisfied sneer. He believed he had the script written. He assumed victory was his. He was mistaken. "I am Ren Callaway," I stated. "Rumors have likely reached you. You've heard I'm a flight risk, that I was a ward of the state, that I squatted in a derelict homestead for 5 weeks during the freeze. You could hear a pin drop. Every word of it is factual." I steadied my breathing. My mother abandoned me when I was 11 years old. She picked a man over her son, and suddenly I was solitary. I spent 3 years bouncing through state care, a temporary guest in strangers' homes. Last November, I fled. I was so terrified of fading away that I decided vanishing by choice was superior to being erased by the system. I located a deserted property on the outskirts. I forced entry. I existed there in isolation during a historic freeze. Starving and petrified, I wasn't sure I'd make it to spring. My tone shook, but I pressed on. However, the experience changed me. I uncovered correspondence and diaries belonging to the former matriarch. Edith Ashford was her name, and that land was her heart. She died a few years back, and with no kin to maintain it, the house was left to rot. I chose to tend to it, not out of ownership, but out of necessity. It required a guardian, and I required a purpose. Something to prove my existence had weight. I scanned the classroom. I held their complete attention. Even Brennan's arrogance had vanished. The authorities caught me, eventually. But rather than returning me to the cycle, my discoverers offered grace. The Thorntons opened their door, and I walked in. They are my foster parents now, and I strive every single day to deserve the opportunity they granted me. I stood tall. So, yes, that is my reality. I carry no shame about it. I made it through the fire, and I'm still standing. If anybody takes issue with that, it is their burden to carry, not mine. I returned to my desk in absolute silence. Then, a solitary clap broke the quiet from somewhere behind me. I spun around. A dark-haired girl with a gentle expression stood by her desk, applauding. It was Juniper Reyes. Most people knew her as June. She sat directly behind me in English class, though we had never exchanged a single word before that moment. One by one, others followed her lead. It wasn't the whole class, but the volume was loud enough to drown out whatever cruel remark Brennan was preparing to launch. As I sank into my chair, June leaned close and whispered, "That was the most courageous thing I have ever witnessed." She asked if I wanted to share lunch. We have been inseparable ever since. That afternoon in English class shifted everything. It changed not only how people viewed me, but how I viewed my own reflection. The months that followed weren't flawless. Hard days still found me. There were times I ached for the mother who had walked away and left me behind. Moments when I felt like a counterfeit, acting the part of a normal kid while terrified everyone could see the cracks in my armor. There were days when ancient fears returned, warning me that stability was a myth, that happiness never stuck around for someone like me. But the good days existed too. They became more frequent as time marched on. I continued working on the Ashford property with Silas every weekend. We painted the entire exterior of the house, a massive project that spanned weeks. We mended fences, cleared the overgrown fields, and began dreaming up crops for the spring planting. The farm was waking up, and in a way, so was I. Mrs. Vance dropped by for her bi-monthly checks and always departed with a smile. My grades were solid. My attendance was spotless. I was walking the line perfectly. Piece by piece, a future I hadn't dared to imagine was forming. In April, roughly 5 months after Silas found me in that barn, Mrs. Vance sat me down for a serious talk. "Ren, I have been tracking your journey," she said. "Your teachers have nothing but praise for you. The Thorntons clearly cherish you, and you have poured your heart into that farm project." I nodded, unsure where the conversation was heading. She offered a smile, a rare expression for her. "I believe it is time we discussed making your placement permanent." My heart skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "It means that if all parties consent, the Thorntons would shift from emergency guardians to your official foster parents. This would be a long-term arrangement through high school, with adoption on the table, if that is what you all choose." I stared at her, my brain struggling to grasp the words. "They have already completed the paperwork," Mrs. Vance added. "They refused to move forward until you had your say, which brings us to now." Her gaze softened into something resembling warmth. "So, the issue isn't whether they want you, Ren. It is whether you want this." Did I? Did I want to remain with two people who showed me more compassion in 5 months than I had known in 3 years? Did I want to keep restoring the farm that had become my passion? Did I want to finally claim a place that felt like home? "Yes," I answered. The word was firm and unwavering, as if my soul had been waiting a lifetime to say it. That evening, Silas and Bet asked me to join them in the family room. "We wanted to ask you properly," Bet said, tears shining in her eyes. "Will you stay with us? Not as a guest or a temporary case, but as family. As our daughter." Silas gave a solemn nod. It won't always be smooth sailing. We are set in our ways, and you are still finding your path. But we will navigate it as a team, if you will have us. I looked at the two people who found me at rock bottom and helped me stand. They had fed me, clothed me, given me sanctuary, and taught me that I wasn't broken goods, that I was worth love and effort. I will have you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I choose you, forever. A month later, in May, a surprise arrived. Silas returned from a town wearing a puzzled look. "Got a call today," he announced. "Ren Ashford Blake. She's flying in from Seattle this weekend. She wants to tour the farm and meet you." I had spoken to Karen a handful of times since Christmas, just brief check-ins where she thanked me for maintaining the property. She seemed pleasant but removed, like someone grateful for the work but unsure what to make of the worker. I couldn't fathom why she would fly across the country to visit a place she had avoided for 3 years. But when Saturday arrived, I understood. Karen pulled up in a rental, a woman in her early 60s with silver-streaked hair and her mother's eyes. She stood on the driveway of the Ashford farm, staring at the house as if confronting a ghost. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I scarcely recognize it." Silas had driven me over to meet her. We guided her through the grounds, highlighting every improvement. We showed her the fresh paint, the restored porch, the mended barn roof with its organized tools, and the garden where the first green shoots of spring vegetables were breaking through. Karen drifted through the hallway, her fingertips grazing the molding and windowsills as if she were trying to absorb the memories through her skin. She paused when she got to the fireplace mantel, staring at the cluster of framed family portraits. "I failed this house," she murmured softly. "I should have been the one to look after it. Mom cherished every beam and board, but I just let it rot. I couldn't handle the ghosts she left behind." She pivoted to face me. "Then you showed up, a 14-year-old drifter with a tattered rucksack and enough grit to move mountains. You accomplished what I was too afraid to try. You brought it back to life." She fished a small, weathered timber box from her purse, its brass fixtures green with oxidation. "Mom handed this to me right before the end. She told me to guard it until I found the person who truly deserved it." I never really grasped her meaning back then. Extending her arm, she offered the container to me. "I'm pretty sure she meant you, Ren." My fingers were unsteady as I accepted the gift. The wood felt satin smooth, polished by decades of touch. The clasp was fragile but held firm. I flicked it open. Resting atop a sheaf of documents was a handwritten note, penned in the meticulous cursive I recognized from Edith's diaries. Naturally, it didn't bear my name. She couldn't have known who I was. The front simply said, "To the finder of this sanctuary." With trembling hands, I unfolded the paper. "To the soul standing in my home. If you are reading this, you didn't come here seeking fortune or property, but because you needed a safe harbor. I know that hunger well. I have carried it in my own chest in various forms throughout my life. For 50 years, this farm was my world. I raised my babies in these rooms. I laid my son to rest in this soil. I grew gray alongside my husband here, and this is where I bade him farewell. Every acre holds a story. Every corner of this structure contains a fragment of my spirit. I am departing now only because my aging bones can no longer serve my will. Yet I am not forsaking this land. I am passing it to the next weary traveler who requires it. If you are reading this, know one thing. You are welcome. You are desired. You fit. I may not know what you call yourself or where you've walked, but I know that if the road brought you to this doorstep, your heart knows a refuge when it finds one. Tend to this place. Cherish it as I did. Let it be the shield for you that it was for me. And understand that even though we are strangers, and I am long gone, I remain with you, in the timber, in the dirt, in the breeze sweeping the pasture. You are not solitary. You never were. With all my affection, Edith Ashford. I had to lower the page. I was shaking too violently to keep reading. Karen dabbed at her wet cheeks while Silas turned his back to us, feigning interest in the view outside. Edith had understood. Somehow, she foresaw that a stray like me would arrive. Someone battered, someone wandering, someone starving for a place to call their own. She had left that message, letting it sit in the dark for 3 years, waiting for me. "Read the rest," Karen said, her voice cracking. "Check what's underneath." I placed the letter down and lifted the thicker stack of paperwork. It was dense legal text, full of jargon that made my head spin. But they were deeds, and they had my name printed on them. "I don't get it." Karen exhaled a shaky breath. The farm belongs to you, Ren. On your 18th birthday, the title transfers fully. Until that day, the Thorntons are holding it in a trust, but make no mistake, it is yours. It was my mother's dying wish, and it is mine, too. I stared at her, my brain refusing to compute the words. Why? Why would you give me this? Because you rescued it. She waved a hand at the walls, the land, the resurrection of a dead place. Because you loved it when the rest of the world walked away. My mother asked for a caretaker. You answered that prayer. She squeezed my shoulder. This land needs a steward who loves it as fiercely as she did. That's not me. That's you. I am 17 now. In a matter of months I will turn 18 and the Ashford estate will legally be in my name. But truthfully, the paperwork doesn't matter. It's already my home. Silas and Bea finalized the adoption last year, on my 16th birthday. We kept it simple. A quick hearing at the courthouse followed by cherry pie at the diner down on Main. No fanfare, no drama. Just 3 people deciding to be a family on paper, confirming what we already knew in our bones. I'm wrapping up my final year at Briarwood High. June and I are still inseparable. We are planning to share a dorm room at the community college come autumn. She is aiming for veterinary medicine. We joke that between us, we have the livestock and the land covered. My marks are solid, and I got into the agricultural management program. Silas likes to say I have a knack for making things thrive. Brennan Holt switched districts halfway through 10th grade. Rumor has it his folks relocated to Omaha. I barely give him a thought these days. Mrs. Vance still drops by occasionally, though it's more of a social call than a checkup now. She recently called me a triumph, but I corrected her. That victory belongs to every single person who offered me a hand. My thoughts still drift back to Micah sometimes, the 7-year-old boy I had to leave behind at the Riverside group home. I managed to send a message through Mrs. Vance telling him I was safe and apologizing for the silent departure. She told me he found a permanent home just 6 months after I ran. A young couple from Lincoln took him in. He is doing well. I like to believe we both stumbled into the families we were always meant to have. The land is waking up again. We put down corn and soybeans last spring, and the yield blew our expectations out of the water. Bet runs the stand at the farmer's market on Saturdays, and folks drive in from miles away just to get their hands on her tomatoes. The farm has turned into a real hub for the neighbors, echoing the days when Edith and Chester were still walking these grounds. Every now and then, I park myself under that ancient oak on the corner and take in everything we have built here. The house gleams with fresh white coats, the barn roof is solid again, and the fields roll out endlessly, a mix of living green and gold. My mind goes back to that terrified 14-year-old crashing through an emergency exit one rainy November night, clutching nothing but a pack and $73. If I could reach back through time, I would tell her she wasn't as isolated as she felt. That it wasn't the end of the line, but the opening chapter. That somewhere, people were waiting just for her. Not the blood relatives she started with, but the kin she would discover in the wild. Edith understood that. Somehow, she foresaw it. She bequeathed this land, this letter, and her love to a stranger she knew would desperately need it. Defying every statistic and all reason, I stumbled right into it. Family is so much more than shared genetics. It is the people breaking bread with you, the ones standing by your side when things get heavy, choosing you without any requirement to do so. Silas and Bet made that choice. Karen made it. Even Edith, across time, decided to trust that someone would eventually arrive. A broken soul who needed this sanctuary just as badly as she once did. Someone to tend the soil, love the land, and call it home. She was right. I am finally home, and I will never be alone again. Thank you for walking this path with me. When I first opened up about this journey, I honestly doubted anyone would pay attention. It is just a simple tale of a girl, a farm, and a household deep in the Nebraska plains. In the big picture, it is quiet and unremarkable. But perhaps that is exactly why it counts, because there are thousands of other kids out there in the dark. Thousands feeling unseen and forgotten, hearts searching desperately for a safe harbor. If my voice reached just one of them, if it sparked a flicker of hope that life improves, then every sentence was worth the effort. I have a small favor to ask. If this journey resonated with your heart, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you stories like this every single week. Tales of redemption, of finding light in the dark, and the magic that happens when regular folks choose to be kind. Also, please leave a comment. I want to know your journey. Have you ever discovered kinship where you least looked for it? Ever received a grace you felt you didn't earn? Have you ever been adrift and then guided to shore? Your experience might be the lifeline someone else is waiting for. Thank you for being present. Thank you for listening and caring. And never forget, you are not isolated in this. You never were.